Welcome to another edition of Blending the Family, the podcast. I am your host, Tommy Maloney, coming to you, recording live in my car. It's another episode of Podcasting While Driving. Yeah, I don't think that sounded right. But, backing out of the driveway. And it's funny because living in Colorado, and when you tell people that are not from Colorado, they go, "Oh, you get a lot of snow." It's not true. We had snow over the weekend, and it's all gone. And it was a 2-hour drive from my son Connor's hockey game on Friday night because of the weather, which is normally it's still probably, I can't remember, because where Connor had his hockey game, I used to play there, and I think it was less than 2 hours normally with good weather, but I digress. And this episode is going to give you a little bit more in depth about who I am. And I know you're thinking, why do I care? I don't know. Maybe it's my insecurity that I need to have this conversation with you. And part of it stems from, I was listening to a couple of podcasts the other day, and both hosts are hugely famous, and I'm not going to mention them because you'll go listen to their podcast, and they don't need any more downloads. I need more downloads. Please tell your friends and family about Blending the Family, the podcast, because there might be something, even on this episode, there might be something that comes out of my mouth that is so profound, your friends and family will be thanking you for saying, "Oh my gosh, that Tommy guy from Blending the Family, what a awesome dude he is." And as I was saying, I was listening to these two podcasts, and one, his opening was talking about his background, and that's part of this episode is going to be, I want to talk to you about my credibility. And again, this could be my insecurity, but I just feel that after we're getting close to 100. We're over 60 episodes. I think this is going to be episode 70. I don't know. As my kids would say, Tommy doesn't do math. Daddy doesn't do math. All right, so one of the hosts was giving, before he did the introduction of the guest, he was talking about his background. And then the other podcast I was listening to, it was actually a really good friend of his that was interviewing him, and the subject was when he was right after his second divorce and how concerned his friend was over the divorce, because he didn't really become a recluse. And I believe I've talked about this before, is I have this, I don't know if it's a habit, but my the way I am wired is, and you'll find this, I hope you'll find this somewhat ironic when I go a little bit more in depth about my background, but I'm very much an introvert, and this is one of the reasons why I don't like having the quote-unquote day job, because my comfort zone is being home or being home, working, or in my past as a trainer, software, corporate leadership trainer, where I traveled. And that was good for me because on several projects, I was the only trainer on site, and that meant, eating alone, just essentially being alone. And I like that. I'm fine with that. I'm comfortable with that. And, you go to those job interviews and they're like, can you work with a team, and can you work by yourself unsupervised? Well, yeah. And in my case, quite honestly, I don't work well with teams, because I find myself to be, or attempt to be, very self-sufficient. And I'm also one of those types of people that still, to this day, I don't like to ask for help. I really struggle with this. So, there you go. We're going to talk on this episode a little bit more in depth about my background. And I don't like to call myself an expert. If you've ever seen the Netflix documentary on Tony Robbins called I Am Not Your Guru, that's me. I don't like the word, I watched and I still have it, but I sent away years ago for this program about how to market yourself as a speaker. And the professional speaker in this video kept saying that all over your social media profile, and at the time there was the big one was LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn you should put somewhere in there that you are an expert. And I don't like that. I don't like to call myself an expert. You probably have, for example, more information about the world of divorce because you lived it a different way than I have. And that's why I don't like being called an expert. In my opinion, an expert is all-knowing. The great, powerful Oz, all-knowing. And that's not true. My start to life was born in Chicago. I am a Cub fan. I am not a Sox fan. And let's talk about that. I've even talked to friends from New York who are baseball fans, and they get it. You're either a Mets fan or a Yankees fan. You're either a Cub fan or a Sox fan. You're not both. Lines do not cross. In my family, majority on my dad's side are Sox fans, including my dad. I've got a couple of cousins who are Cub fans, but for the most part, I'm a diehard Cub fan. I was in, I believe, Connecticut when the Cubs won the World Series, trying to stay awake, and here we go, going through the construction zone. Let's get through this before I might say something profound. And gosh, I can't wait till this construction is done. But I believe I was in Connecticut trying to stay awake during that Cub Cleveland series. And all I remember is at one point hearing, Chris Bryant, you're a World Series champion. How do you feel? And I'm just like, yay, we won. I'm going to sleep. Born in Chicago. My parents divorced when I was approximately 5 years old. My mom and I moved out of the city of Chicago and hit the suburbs and lived literally right down the street from my grandparents, who pretty much raised me. My mom worked 2 jobs while raising me. And I think, not knowing, but I think that's where my passion My why is serving the divorced community, and because I've seen it firsthand. I still, and if you heard my episode with Flora Brown when she interviewed me for her podcast, I talk about vividly remembering the day that my dad left, and that's one memory that really influenced me in, I want to say, in a positive way, because I didn't want, when my son Connor, his mom and I, when we went through our divorce, I didn't want him to have that same visualization or memory of watching his dad leave. And not to jump too far ahead, I've learned I don't do a lot of things linear, so get used to this episode of me jumping around. But when my former wife and I split up, I was in I'm trying to think how many, since 2008, I believe, 2007, 2008, I can't remember. My job entailed me traveling for work, and during the divorce, I was on the road, and the day after my former spouse, and if you ever read anything that I do, for example, on the Good Men Project, and if I'm writing anything about my former spouse, I just call her the former, and the next day, I'll never forget, outside waiting for a taxi to take me to Denver International Airport, and it was just a weird feeling, leaving your house, not knowing if you were coming back to that house or what the next steps were. And that was a Monday morning, and by Wednesday, I already had the divorce papers FedEx to me. And that's something that I don't know if this is the time to really talk about that, but I've always had this suspicion that something was going on before I was asked for the divorce. And we'll go into that some other time. But anyway, my parents divorced when I was approximately 5 years old. Mom and I moved from Chicago to the burbs in Highland Park, Illinois, and as I stated, right down the street from my grandparents. And it was I still believe I had a really good upbringing. I think I was very fortunate to have my grandparents in my life, including my great-grandfather, who would just regale stories of when he was a youth and playing baseball. It was actually my great-grandfather who helped me learn how to ride a bike. My great-grandfather was just somebody that I'm very and totally blessed to have known him. I heard wonderful stories from my mom about my great-grandmother and what a sweet lady she was. And she passed away at an early age. I believe she was in her early 40s of cancer. And, I can't say that's a regret because I can't control that. Not ever having the opportunity to meet her. But my grandparents pretty much raised me because, after school, it's funny because I talk a lot about being an introvert, and after school I'd go right home, and I honestly say I'd go right home and do my homework, but I would go right home, and then I'd get a phone call from my grandmother going, "Why are you at the house? You're supposed to be down here at our house." I'm like, okay. So I pack up my things and go down there, and until my mom came home, or even later, because I would probably have dinner at my grandparents'. But great memories of spending time with my grandparents. And my grandmother, actually, my grandfather and grandmother, my grandfather Marty passed away, can't think, 2012, 13, 14? Anyway, but they moved to Colorado because all the grandkids are here in Colorado. And I made sure, even to this day, Connor and I, or Ann and I, or the girls, Betsy and Becca, we'll take a trip and go have brunch with my grandmother Helen on a Sunday. And it's wonderful, because even though I say it's wonderful, but if you have a grandmother or maybe an aunt, and not to pick on the females, but hear me out first, please. And that is, my grandmother is, if there was an Olympic event for nagging, gold medal, hands down. My grandmother loves, especially me, being not only the oldest grandchild, but I'm probably closer to her than my two cousins, because my cousins lived here in Colorado when they were growing up, and they didn't see a lot of my grandmother unless they, my aunt and uncle had trips out to Chicago. But that's where I make an important point to my son, to Connor, is that we try and spend as much time, as painful it can be at times, as painful of getting nagged, I find it very important that we spend time with our elders. Okay? Lived in the burbs of Chicago. I'll fast forward and went to Catholic school, and I'm very honored that I went to Carmel High School in Mundelein, Illinois, and my parents felt that I needed some discipline. Not to say I was a bad kid. It was just schoolwork. I was very lackadaisical, if I can pronounce that word correctly, and structure. So discipline and structure, and that's what Carmel did for me. It really gave me some really good structure, and great people. Learned, as far as religion goes, and to today, it's been a little bit of time, but to this day, because of that influence, I find meditation very helpful in my life. And we would do meditation in high school, but we had an alternative motive, and our motive was, could we go to the chapel and go meditate, aka can we go take a nap? And we got busted when one of my classmates was snoring, and that was the last of going to chapel to meditate. From high school, I went to a junior college, learned, and unfortunately, I wish I really had paid attention to who I was. And as a parent, you want the best for your kids. You want them to, not only succeed in high school and begin to find themselves in high school, but go to a good college. And I really wish I had taken a different path. And that is, I am not the type of person that likes to sit in one place. And I apologize for, and I noticed this is of late, I apologize to you because I noticed in several of the podcast episodes I'm bitching about the day job, and that's a decision I made, right or wrong. It brings in a steady paycheck, and I know things are going to change here very shortly. But the point here is, as parents, we want our kids to go to college, get a degree, get a good job, as they would say in Seinfeld, yada, yada, yada. No, I mentioned the lobster bisque for you Seinfeld fans. But my self-realization, I really wish I had that at an earlier stage, that I was not meant for college. I was meant for something else. And I didn't know what it was, but maybe thankfully I did go to college. And in junior college, I stumbled upon the local radio station, which really wasn't much of a radio station. It broadcast to what was it called? The cafeteria. It broadcast only to the cafeteria. We didn't have a tower. We didn't have a broadcast tower. That was it. And somebody would have to actually physically flip a switch in the cafeteria for us to broadcast. And quite frankly, there are probably several times where you were talking to yourself. Primarily, just like this podcast, where I'm right now in the car talking to myself. And if it was daylight, people might think, oh, he's on the phone. Or somebody might look over and go, he's nuts. He's talking to himself. Yeah, I'm nuts. Oh, coffee time. And the coffee is not that good this morning. Bitter. Ugh. I don't know why. Have to run we use a wire filter in our coffee maker. We only use paper filters, and maybe the filter just needs to be cleaned through the dishwasher. But because of going through that junior college radio, I ended up transferring with my dad's help to Columbia College in downtown Chicago. And that's where I found my true calling, which I not only do I not do things linear, I am a walking oxymoron, and to a lot of people, just a moron. But it was a blessing that my dad pushed me to go to Columbia College, and actually I had my dad set up a meeting with a lady named Barbara, who is head of the television department, and I'm going, I really don't have a television face. I'm not that good looking of a person. But she encouraged me not only go to Columbia College, but she encouraged me to think about what path I wanted to take. And growing up in Chicago, the radio station you listened to was WLS. Larry Lujak, Tommy Edwards, John Records Landecker, and yes, Records is truly his middle name. Bob Surratt. I mean, these were some of the great disc jockeys back in my time. And that's what I did. I enrolled into the radio communication program. I only lasted a couple years because I was paying for school and I ran out of money. But I took that knowledge, I took that those hands-on classes and courses, and I got my first radio job in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Well, excuse me, let me tell you how ironic that is. I'm going to tell you how ironic that is. Growing up in Chicago, I was anybody want to guess? What favorite football team? That's right, I was a Chicago Bear fan. Chicago Bears and Green Bay Packers are a huge rivalry. Huge. Not as much anymore because the Bears have sucked. Pretty much, in my opinion, right after Jim McMahon left. The punky QB known as McMahon. But here I am going to Green Bay, Wisconsin. WIXX was the radio station I started my broadcast career. Started doing weekend overnights, and to some people, if you're familiar with the phrase graveyard shift, that's what the overnight shift was. My shift was usually midnight to 6 in the morning. But that created a new calling for me, that was producing morning shows. And what a morning show producer does is not only do they prepare the morning show in ways such as making coffee, making sure the coffee is ready, taking any news stories that might have some humor in them, having the weather prepared, any funny sound effects. And back in those days, we used what was called carts, C-A-R-T-S. And if you're familiar with 8-track tapes, that's what they were. They were essentially 8-track tapes. And that's how we used funny little sound effects. Was there was a button assigned to a certain cart machine that you would use. So I spent, I think it was a year in Green Bay, got fired. And that was the thing about the radio industry. You got fired a lot. And this is my own psychoanalysis, and that is, if you meet somebody who's never been fired from a job, I don't know, I just don't think that person has ever lived unless you've been fired from a job. And how to handle that type of adversity. In that industry, in the radio industry, I got fired because, in my opinion, my place on the morning show, I started to get more and more popular with the audience, and my boss, who's also the main host of the morning show, didn't like that, and so it was time for Tommy to leave. And so from Green Bay, Wisconsin, I went to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I'm trying to remember where I went from there. Eau Claire, oh gosh, I'm trying to think when I did Dubuque, Iowa, Lincoln, Nebraska, Beaumont, Texas, maybe it was Cookeville. Maybe I went from Eau Claire to Cookeville, which is right outside of Nashville. And on a normal podcast, on the Blaming Family podcast, and you hear the voice guy, I will give you his radio name. His radio name was Mark Murphy, and Mark Murphy was the morning show host of Kicks 106.9, just outside of Nashville. And that's how I ended up meeting Mark. Was I went in as not only the overnight person, but the morning show producer. Talk about long days. My day would start around 11 p.m. and would go until maybe 2, 3 in the afternoon, producing the following morning show. Anyway, so I bounced around for 10 years in radio. Not one regret. And after getting fired in Lincoln, Nebraska, Froggy 98, I think that was, I decided no more radio for me. I was tired of it. And it was at a stage in my life where I had no 401k, I had no health insurance, and that's the thing about especially small market radio that my career was primarily in, was the fact that I never had health insurance. I never had any kind of financial stability, really. Bounced around radio, as I said, for 10 years, and then decided to move to Colorado. Had visited Colorado a couple of times, not a skier, not a snowboarder, just someone just fell in love with Colorado. And so that's been since 1997, when I left Lincoln, Nebraska and came to Colorado. Did move one time with my former, when she was pregnant with our son Connor. We moved back to the Midwest, and neither of us could find full-time jobs, so we came back to Colorado. And if I had any cojones, I would have said, no, we're staying in Colorado. We are staying in Colorado. But no, I was a wuss. And yes, dear, whatever you say, dear, we're going to pack up. And we both had really good jobs before we left Colorado to go back to the Midwest. I was actually working at a full-time job, which I really, really enjoyed. I created my own niche in that company, and I was also working part-time at an ice rink, driving a Zamboni. Loved it. I was loving life. Might not have been loving the marriage, but still loving life. And we'll skip ahead. Came back to Colorado and had to, find new jobs coming back to Colorado because neither of our full-time jobs would take us back. I stumbled upon a career in corporate training where you traveled, and that's what I did. I did that for almost 10 years as well. My first 10 were working in call centers as a trainer, and primarily my background is I would just in one word would say communication, with the radio, with the training. And during my work world back in 2008, I found myself divorced, and this is where when I say you're probably more of an expert than I am, I had to learn how to be single again. And the other part was I use this not ever knowing what it truly means to be homeless, but the way I sense it, the way I phrase it, I was homeless, meaning I wasn't living in that house, so where did I live? I lived in hotels. And I was very fortunate to have a friend who had a connection with Marriott, and I would, every other weekend when I would have Connor, he and I would stay at a hotel for the weekend. And at first it was wonderful. He enjoyed it, and at the young age of 5, he actually had stipulations as far as the hotel. The hotel, number one, had to have a pool, which was funny at the time. He didn't know how to swim. Then the other stipulation was it had to have a hot tub or a jacuzzi, which again I find funny because I can't swim. But I always made sure we had those two things, no matter what hotel we stayed at. And I take those memories and relate them to with my dad. My dad would take me to the local Y as a kid, and he would teach me how to swim. Or I think it was the Sheraton Hotel in downtown Chicago, where when I'd go visit him, that's one of the places he and I would go to, is go swimming at the Sheraton Hotel. So, as I was saying, my background was pretty much in corporate training, software training, did some leadership training, did some sales training, just training on the end user, on how to use certain products, and I loved it. I had a lot of fun doing it. And I'll take you up to, this in 2017, was once again laid off in March of 2017, and it's rough working as a contract trainer because you don't know when you're going to work or not work, and I found myself more not working than working. A little bit more about me, and that is, 2018, my goal is to complete my third book. I've written 2 other books. The first one is, and if you're familiar with my Parenting Tip Tuesday, some of those tips come from the book, that first book called 25 Tips for Divorced Dads. You can find that on the website, hint, hint. And the second book I wrote was called Why Not You, Why Not Me, which when I was first going through my divorce, to help me go through my own little therapy in my head, I would write. And the first blog that I created, or blog website, was, what was it? Oh, Yes You Can Motivation. Yes You Can Motivation. And from there, that spawned onto Tommy Maloney International, which spawned onto currently, which is Blending the Family. But the ebook, Why Not You, Why Not Me, is just simply just early blogs I put together as I was going through divorce, and you'll see or read, I should say, of the transition I was going through during that time. So soon to be 3-time author. I've spoken on the TEDx stage. If you've ever seen a TED Talk or a TEDx Talk, the big red dot, I've actually spoken on that big red dot, which I'm still to this day shocked. And you can find that video on the website as well. But when I explain to people, or when they start prodding me to ask me more about opening up and who I am, I'm proud of the fact that I'm a TEDx speaker. I'm proud of the fact to say I am currently a 2-time published author. I've been a paid speaker. I'm not one of those people, again, I don't like asking for help, and I need to get over that. But I'm also one of those people that I'm very transparent, but at the same time, I don't open up very well. You kind of have to ask me questions in order for me to open up. And, again, as an only child, I spent a lot of time alone. And not to say that I didn't have friends as a kid. As I think about it, red and blue lights. That's not a good sign. How late am I? I'm running late this morning. Oh, well. Construction. We're doing construction on this road? No. Trying to think. I forgot where I was going. Crap. Well, anyway, it takes a lot for me to open up, which, talking about being an only child. The episode 12-minute conversations with Mr. Jones. One of the questions he asked me about was my inner circle, and I did answer it quickly without thinking, but it's true. I really, even today, I have friends, but I don't spend a lot of time with them. I've got some really good friends, unfortunately, that are back in Chicago. So I really don't spend a lot of time. I've got one of my dearest friends who lives less than a mile from our house, and Ken is his name, and rarely see them, which is stupid on my part. I've spoken other places. I've been a keynote speaker, written for several online magazines. There's a parenting magazine in New Zealand I've written for. There's a magazine called Modern Gladiator, which people look at me and go, what? What kind of magazine is that? And I want to say it reminds me a lot of GQ with a little bit of ink in it, with a little bit of even parenting all rolled into one. And I've written for them. Right now, the one magazine I consistently write for is the Good Men Project. So a lot of the blogs you see on the website come from, and I do this on purpose, but I send them my weekly article because I'm a columnist for them. So I send them my weekly column. They do the editing, the pretty editing, making sure I spell correctly, and then I repurpose it onto our website. And because of those articles, there's going to be a future book of all those articles, probably in 2019, going forward. Already have that planned out. Third book comes from a little bit of the TEDx talk, which is called My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. Same name, title of the book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. And looking, I will be working on that very shortly, but looking to use a Kickstarter type website called Publicizer. They are geared more towards authors, and just like Kickstarter, you essentially, and this is where it's hard for me to do this, but you're essentially asking for money, and in my case, the money is going to go to the editing process. And editing is to get a very qualified editor, and this is, you don't want your neighbor's cousin's next door neighbor, twice removed, who once won a poetry contest in 5th grade and considers themselves to be an expert on editing. You really want to invest your money if you're self-publishing like I have, and I will, but you really want to invest your money in a high-quality editor for your books. That's the one thing I've told people that have said, "Oh, I'm thinking about writing a book," and I said, as you're writing it, don't worry about the spelling. Don't worry about where the commas go. Worry about, especially if you're self-publishing, worry about having the funds to get a highly qualified editor, because they will make or break your book. Trust me on that. Even my first book, as short as it was, and I had an editor on that as well, because I really believe in that process. I believe that editors are the backbone to the writing world, and they are highly worth whatever money they're asking for. So as I said, working on the third book, it's 90%, 85% done. But it just, as I said, I need to use Publicizer to create the campaign to get funds to, I know who the editor is going to be already. So there. And I think it takes you to where we are today, and that's where we have over 3,000 downloads on this podcast. I firmly believe that I've had some wonderful guests on the podcast, and I love the podcast platform because it goes back to my radio days. I loved working in radio. I loved being a morning show producer, but I always wanted to also be on the air. And the podcast platform for me lets me do both. Lets me still be a producer and a host. And I get to pick and choose who I want on the podcast. I get to produce the elements. I get to use my friend Mark Murphy as our voice guy. So podcasting is where I see myself continue this journey. And who knows, maybe this will just be its own podcast. Maybe podcasting from the car could be the daily podcasting from the car. And this could be its own separate show. Who knows? But that's it. Looking back, being raised by a single mom has taught me a lot. It's taught me, how to survive. And then the flip side is what I learned from my dad. And, a couple of life lessons I've written about and talked about is, number one, my dad was always wonderful at when he would see somebody on the streets of Chicago. The running joke is that my dad has been called the mayor of Michigan Avenue because he worked in sales and advertising for many, many years, and he just knew. It seemed like he knew everybody in Chicago, and just walking with him 10 feet, he'd run into somebody. And the life lesson I learned from him was how to do a proper handshake, look people in the eye, greet people with their name, use that name more than once even in a short conversation, and I just smile back at people. And the other life lesson that I learned was, he was a chaperone on, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 field trips that we took to Chicago, and my dad met up with us. One specifically was one of the newspapers, and we got a tour of one of the Chicago newspapers, and he again was the chaperone. And I took that, and when Connor would have field trips and the teachers would send out an email saying, hey, we need chaperones, I would be one of the first to respond back saying, I'm in, you tell me where and when, I'm there. And so I learned some great lessons from both my parents. And you can't choose your parents, but I'm very blessed and fortunate that higher power, spirit, God, source, energy, whatever you want to call it, gave me the parents that I have, and the grandparents, and so there you go. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I've been a paid speaker. I've written books, made little money off my books. I feel very fortunate and blessed that over 3,000 downloads on a podcast. I don't know where life's going to take me, other than I'm sitting at a red light, and right now it's not going to take me anywhere. So there you go. Thanks for listening. Green light. Let me put the coffee down. Let me make my turn. And let me say to you some parting words. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody who's maybe walked a similar path as you. And I firmly believe that we're on this planet one time. And in that one time, as I said, I'm a walking oxymoron, but do what you love what you do. And right now, I know personally that's not where I'm at, but you never know what the day is going to bring to you. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know, all of a sudden you're going to get an email from somebody saying, hey, we need somebody that can do X. We know you can do that. So be grateful every day. Love your family. More importantly, love yourself. And as I like to try to say in every podcast, thank you for sharing. Thank you for caring. Thank you for all the downloads. And I hope to continue to bring you what I hope is value in the world of not just divorce and mom issues and dad issues, but we've had the episode of wine. We've had some fantastic authors, some fantastic speakers, and that's all I hope. I hope you enjoy listening to this podcast, and thank you.